Hello dear colonists, and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to present a Rimworld iceberg. There weren't many of these floating around, so I decided to make my own by picking the most interesting entries from other icebergs, asking some of my subscribers for other entries, and adding some of my own. I don't think I should be saying this, but I'm going to say it just in case. Some of the information presented within this iceberg are conspiracies and theories, which do not reflect reality. I will disclaim said information beforehand so you'll know when I'm referring to a classic iceberg conspiracy and when I'm actually referring to real canonic or cut content from the game. With this being said, let's not delay this any further and let's begin. Level 0. The Sky. This level is about the entries everyone knows about in Rimworld. The first one is 8 without a table. I'm sure you know what this is about. A great meme in the Rimworld community. When pawns eat without a table, they get a mood debuff, with that often leading to mental breakdowns. It's just funny to think about a person barely holding it in and then snapping, going on a murderous rampage because they had to eat without a table. The next entry is organ harvesting. Again, a very popular thing in Rimworld. You've done it, I've done it, we've all done it. Harvesting and selling organs is perhaps one of the most amusing and common things in Rimworld, especially when done on prisoners. Too many mods. If you've been playing Rimworld for a while, chances are you're now using mods. And you know what's the deal with mods? There's never enough. You started with 1, then 2, then 10, and now your mod list is probably loaded with over 300 mods, out of which you're making use of probably only half in your average playthrough. Time to get more mods. Next entry, war crimes. This applies to organ harvesting as well, but on a much broader term. The Geneva Convention? More like the Geneva Suggestion, am I right? There's even a mod that turns the Geneva Convention in a checklist. But yeah, it's safe to say that prisoners and enemies don't get treated too well in the Rimworld universe. We are now on level 1 of the iceberg, and the first entry is Rimworld Inspiration. The majority of you probably know that Rimworld was actually inspired by a similar game called Dwarf Fortress, a construction and colony simulation game from 2002 that was released in an alpha version in 2006. Dwarf Fortress is rather similar to Rimworld, except there is far less war crimes. Mechanoid Wars. This entry is about the Mechanoid Wars, which are often referred to in various flavor texts in the game, such as the one of the pikemen. In short, humanity in the Rimworld universe has faced a great crisis, where they had to go to war against armies of mechanoids bent on destroying everything. When this happened exactly is unclear, but if you're curious, I have a video on my channel where I try to piece together the lore of Rimworld in a timeline, including the Mechanoid Wars. The Crypto Sleep Revival Briefing. This makes reference to a document with the same name written by Tynan Sylvester, the developer of Rimworld. This document offers us the perspective of a person that just awakened from crypto sleep on the planet Euterpe. There are offered information regarding the state of universe and various in-game elements and lore. If you haven't read it yet, I'd highly suggest for you to do so. The link is going to be in the description. The next entry is the Man in Black. The Man in Black is a mysterious pawn that appears as a new colonist only when certain dire conditions are triggered. The conditions are that all of your colonists must be downed, your colony must have had at least 3 colonists at some point, and it cannot happen twice within a year. The Man in Black will always be wearing black clothes and carrying food and medicine. The point of the Man in Black is to offer your colony a sort of guardian angel in case all of your colonists are down and unable to heal themselves, essentially helping out the player in regaining its footing after a rough attack. Different planet types. This entry refers to the fact that in the Rimworld universe there's many different planet classifications, the Rimworld being only one of them. There are Tox Worlds, War Worlds, Transcendent Worlds, Glare Worlds, Herb Worlds, and many others, which is a fact that many players seem not to know, excepting mainly for the Glare Worlds, as references to these worlds are sparse and not often mentioned within the game. Again, I have a video on that too if you're interested, where I list every planet classification and what they encompass. The Rimworld is a post-apocalyptic world. This references the fact that the Rimworld, where the action takes place, is a post-apocalyptic world, with irradiated zones, derelict buildings, ancient vaults, and destroyed mechs laying around along with various pieces of junk, such as shopping carts and car parts. It's easy to deduce that at some point, the Rimworld where we play was either a Glare world, an urban world, or at least a mid-world that went through an apocalyptic event. We are now on level 2. As we are starting to submerge under the water, the facts presented are also becoming slightly more obscure, but don't worry, there is still many levels to explore. The first entry on level 2 is the FTL inconsistency. The FTL inconsistency refers to the fact that canonically, faster than light speed has never been developed in the Rimworld universe, thus taking people tens, if not hundreds of years, to travel from one point to the other of the universe with their spaceships. The FTL inconsistency is about the fact that despite FTL never being invented, certain things in Rimworld are shown to work on a faster than light speed, specifically psycasts. The skip psycasts or the solar pinhole, for example, are capable of transporting objects from one place to the other near instantaneously, almost at light speed, proving that, at the very least, one form of FTL transportation is available in Rimworld. Of course, perhaps these techniques couldn't be applied to large spaceships due to limitations of the Psycaster, but it's an interesting concept nonetheless. CE compatible. If you've been installing mods, you've probably seen this one. Combat Extended is one of the most popular mods in Rimworld, with many players using it. It became highly popular at some point for users to ask mod developers if their mods were compatible with Combat Extended, so much to the point of mod developers actually posting CE compatible in their mods descriptions, just so people wouldn't ask anymore. The next entry is the 1 hour loading time. More of a humorous joke if anything, but perhaps a reality for some. It shouldn't come as a surprise that when you have hundreds of mods, Rimworld may take a long time to open and load. For me, I think the record was a solid 10 minutes, and while the 1 hour loading time might be more of an exaggeration, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a reality for some. Let me know down in the comments how long it takes you to load Rimworld if you have a big mod list, and while you're at it, press the like button for this video to motivate me in making more videos. But now, enough with the shameless self-promotion, let's get back into the Iceberg. The Forbidden mod. Some of you may know about it, some of you probably not, and some of you might have actually used it. The Forbidden mod, also known as RJW, is an infamous mod in the Rimworld community due to its focus on sexually charged themes. I'm not going to go in depth about what this mod adds, but it adds a lot in the terms of getting freaky, with the mod even being controversial for being a bit too much in terms of the type of content and mechanics added. You can imagine the rest, I'm not going to describe it further, I'd like to keep this video monetized if possible. Components did not exist. This entry references the fact that in the early versions of Rimworld, components did in fact not exist. Turrets and other similar buildings requiring components required in fact just steel, creating a joke in the community about components not being real. The dev mode is a player using its architect powers. A common theory in the community is that the player is an architect mentally influencing the colony on how they should act, what they should build, and what they should do, with the dev mode simply being you, the architect, making full use of its powers. This is a silly theory in my opinion, but an amusing one nonetheless. The next entry is the Australia ban. Maybe many of you knew this already, but at some point Rimworld was banned in Australia. The game was deemed too violent and explicit, and Australian authorities took the decision of banning the game. If you were from Australia, you legally couldn't purchase and play Rimworld. Subsequently, Ludion Studios made an appeal and Rimworld was reapproved in Australia. Just a silly thing to think about. The Megatherium. Another entry referencing things that changed over the year in Rimworld. The Mega Slot's old name in the game was actually Megatherium at first, referencing a real-world extinct animal that was in fact a gigantic sloth living in South America in the early Pliocene through the end of the late Pleistocene period. We are now on level 3 of the Iceberg. The water is getting colder and darker. Light doesn't reach as well, and the facts and conspiracy theories will become far more obscure. Extra floors. This entry is about the fact that in Rimworld, buildings don't have extra floors. Everything in vanilla Rimworld is built on the ground floor. The only way to go up or down on the map is through the cavern holes added in the Anomaly DLC. Whether players will be able to build extra floors in the future or not is up to debate. But they probably won't be a thing due to the game's own limitations and balancing issues. I guess colonists will never know what a staircase is. New Jerusalem. If you play the Anomaly DLC, you have probably managed to come in contact with the Golden Cube. Harmless at first, even offering a mood boost for people interacting with it, the truly devious nature of the cube will become apparent only after a while, when your colonists will develop obsessions related to the cube, worshipping it on a daily basis, feeling the need to play with it and creating cube-themed sculptures out of dirt, sand, rocks, or various junk. In their crazed cube obsession, pawns will start talking to themselves or to the cube and referencing a place called New Jerusalem. Whether this place truly exists or what the place is unknown. Eastern Roman vibes is a quote from Tynan, the director of the game, when asked what his inspiration for the Shattered Empire in Rimworld was. It's probably obvious to the majority of history buffs playing Rimworld, but the Shattered Empire, its textures, its naming convention, and everything related to it are heavily inspired by the ancient Roman Empire. Storytellers are architects. This is another very common theory in the community. You've probably heard or seen people mentioning it, but a fair amount of the fanbase believes for Randy Random, Cassandra Classic, and Phoebe Chillax to actually be architects, influencing the events on the Rimworld, bringing both triumph and tragedy to your colonies for mysterious reasons. Thrombos, perhaps one of the most mysterious elements in Rimworld. Thrombos are tall unicorn-like animals. Perhaps the strongest animal in the game, their horns and leather are worth a lot, as they prove to be excellent weapons and textiles for clothes. The reason why Thrombos are on the Iceberg is because, canonically, no one knows where they come from. Every other original animal in the game, such as the boomrat or boomalopes or wargs, were the result of genetic manipulation. Thrombos, on the other hand, are a mysterious animal that humanity has no recollection of ever creating. Perhaps they were created by an architect, perhaps they simply appeared one day. Even more mysterious is their description, suggesting for old Thrombos to be very wise and intelligent and simply choosing never to speak. The Rotstink Geyser is something found within Rimworld's file, but never added into the game. Probably cut content, it's unclear what the Rotstink Geyser was supposed to be, but judging by the name, I would assume for it to be similar to a geyser, except it causes lung rot in nearby ponds and animals. More of an environmental hazard that'd be constantly present on the map. Sawmill work. If you played Rimworld on its very early versions, you might know this one, and if you do, you have probably achieved Ankh status years ago. Extremely early in the game, until version 0.4.460, upon cutting trees, you'd receive wood logs, which you will need to turn into wooden planks in order to build other workbenches, with logs used to build log walls. Planks and wooden logs were subsequently merged into just wood to make the entire process simpler, removing a work type called sawmill work, which was the work required for colonists to turn logs into planks, simplifying the entire process and removing a pointless resource from the game. The next entry is multiplayer. Probably many of you know, but Rimworld has a mod that allows for you to play the game in multiplayer. You can either co-op or have different colonies, but this mod essentially allows multiple people to play on the same Rimworld planet at once. It's a pretty cool, unofficial way of having fun with your Rimworld friends, as you inevitably cause the downfall of each other's colony through petty arguing and pointless banter. Following entry is Zerigium. Another one for the OG Rimworld players. Zerigium was in fact the old name for the healroot plant. The healroot plant had a different texture in the earlier versions of Rimworld, and it was called Zerigium, which was changed in the next versions. Level 4. There's barely any light reaching here and things are starting to get real. You may have gotten in waters that are too deep, but with the surface of the iceberg so far from you, your only choice is to keep diving. And with this, let's introduce the next entry, the stolen modded content controversy. While Rimworld never faced too many controversies, except in the Australian one I mentioned previously, this one was actually a bit of an issue for a while. Ludion Studios was accused of stealing content from mod developers and adding it to the vanilla game. An example of this is the mod that added kids in Rimworld, with children becoming officially part of the game later on, or with the mod that added books, which also became a vanilla element. Ludion has responded to these accusations by saying that the modding community in Rimworld is very large, with mods spanning in the tens of thousands, and at this point any idea that they would introduce in the game would very probably be something that was already done in a mod. And while ideas might be similar, that wouldn't necessarily mean they were stolen. In fact, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to quote the Rimworld FAQ section of Ludion Studios on their site. Occasionally, we're accused of stealing mod content because there are general conceptual similarities between things we do and mods that have existed. However, this conceptual resemblance is an unavoidable consequence of Rimworld having over 10,000 mods on the Steam Workshop. Any game only has so many natural and obvious ways to expand, and with 10,000 mods on the workshop, pretty much all those ways have been touched by one mod or another. For example, we've been accused of stealing mods that do psychic powers, with the royalty expansion, beliefs and religions, with the ideology expansion, children, genetic modification, vampires, with the biotech expansion, and many more. But all these obvious and natural ways to expand the game, there are countless books, movies, and other games touching on vampires, children, gene modding, psi powers, etc. for good reason. Even more, several of them stem from our own much older development materials, including our 2013 Kickstarter's proposed module section, which includes beliefs and religions, and the Rimworld Fiction Primer from 2013, which includes xenohumans. I agree with Ludion Studios on this one, and I ask for you to try and put yourselves into their shoes. If you were in Tynan's place, it will be very hard to create some sort of new content for Rimworld that will both reflect the vanilla aspect of the game and at the same time be completely different and original from any mod created so far. At this point, the Rimworld dev team can only hope to recreate what mods have already done, but better, or to create content that is so vast and different from the original game's theme in order to avoid any mod similarities, to the point of perhaps not even representing the game, which must be a rather frustrating situation for them to be in, an actual case of suffering from success. The next entry is Tough Cleopatra Classic. Another case of old or cut game content. Tough Cleopatra Classic was actually another storyteller that has now been removed from the game. While the name might suggest that Cleopatra was a harder version of Cassandra, it was in fact the opposite, with Tough Cleopatra Classic serving as an easier version of Cassandra, giving the players more leeway. I would assume the reason for its removal is that since it functioned essentially the same as regular Cassandra, just a bit easier, it became obsolete once difficulty sliders and options were properly implemented. Cat Girls. This entry references the fact that in Rimworld, since the Biotech DLC, without making use of any mods, players could create, through completely vanilla means, a race of cat girls by using the smooth tail and cat ears genes. Truly an anime fan dream come true. The Opti-Animals and Trans-Animals. Opti-Animals, in this case Opti-Cows, are a breed of animals mentioned very obscurely in the Rimworld universe. One of the Opti-Cows mentions is in Jacqueline Jackalope Richter's backstory, which describes her childhood as one spent on a farm surrounded by fields and Opti-Cows. Now this is a bit confusing because Opti-Cows are both canon and non-canon. While their addition to Jacqueline's backstories renders them canonical in the Rimworld universe, their existence was first mentioned in the Long Sleep Revival Briefing, which is a document similar to the Crypto Sleep Revival Briefing that was deemed obsolete and non-canonical after the release of the Crypto Sleep Revival Briefing. In that document written by Tynan, Opti-Cows, or simply the prefix Opti, indicated a breed of animals with enhanced intelligence. While still not a human level of intelligence, Opti-Animals were fully capable of using tools, form long-term goals, and organize in social groups, even being capable of speaking a few words, but completely unable to read or think abstractly. Animals other than Opticows that were mentioned are the Optidogs, Optipigs, Optiwhales, and Optimonkeys. While the Long Sleep Revival Briefing as a document is considered non-canon nowadays, the continued existence of Opticows within Jacqueline's backstory at the very least confirms the continued canonicity of Opti-animals, or at the very least Opticows. Similarly to that, Transanimals were another breed of intelligent animals, except one that could match human intelligence, with a breed of transbirds presumably living as a crew and captaining various starships. Transbirds or transanimals aren't mentioned in any other backstory though, so their canonic existence has since then been removed, probably due to Tynan wanting to avoid the existence of other highly intelligent life forms other than humans and AIs from the universe. Although if their existence was continued, I could definitely see a Rimworld evolving on a kind of Planet of the Apes situation, which personally I think will be very cool. Malari Block. This one's pretty simple. The Malari Block was the previous name for the penoxycycline pills. Like the name implies, they simply blocked malaria. Their name was changed later on into penoxycycline we know today, probably due to the new name actually sounding much better and due to the fact that penoxycycline can block more illnesses now and not just malaria. The Universe Quick Primer. Remember the Crypto Sleep Revival Briefing document and the Long Sleep Revival Briefing document? As I mentioned previously, the Long Sleep became non-canonic and obsolete after the introduction of the Crypto Sleep Revival Briefing, an updated version of it. But now it's time to tell you the truth. There is actually an additional document to these two, which was in fact in the middle. After the Long Sleep Revival Briefing and before the Crypto Sleep Revival Briefing, the Universe Quick Primer was another document meant to shed light and provide some lore exposition to the player, which has now been rendered non-canon and obsolete. The Universe Quick Primer was a far less detailed version of the Crypto Sleep Revival Briefing. What's interesting about it though is that it worked in tandem with the Long Sleep Revival Briefing, with both of them being canonic at the time. The Universe Quick Primer was in fact meant as a reward for creative reward backers and other contributors of Rimworld back at the time. We are now descending deeper, down to level 5. We have almost reached maximum depth. There is almost no light shining down here, and the iceberg itself is actually starting to thin out. Oskar Potocki made art for Rimworld. This is a pretty random and obscure fact which isn't exactly mentioned too much around. If you're a big fan of the modding community of Rimworld, you should know who Oskar Potocki is, the man behind the Vanilla Expanded series, who mainly takes care of drawing the art for the mod series. But another interesting fact is that he actually made art for certain elements of Rimworld itself. This is something confirmed by Ludion Studios themselves in their FAQ section, noting that Oskar Potocki, who is a major Rimworld modder, has also done artwork for Ludion since 2019. We have on a few occasions worked with him directly and included art that he originally made for a mod. Generally, this is simple things like different visual variations for animals. Nonetheless, it's a pretty interesting fact to know that Oskar's Vanilla Expanded mods were in fact so similar to the classic Rimworld Vanilla style to the point of having Oskar make art for the main game itself. The next entry is competitive PvP. As I mentioned previously, Rimworld can be played in multiplayer, through the multiplayer mod. Something unexpected to appear out of this though is an actual competitive PvP scene. The game mode Power Wars involved multiple players taking control of two different teams, a red team and a blue team, where they will fight against each other, capturing strategic points on a map and attempting to wipe out each other. More than that, tournaments are apparently held for this game mode. Rimworld is perhaps the last game I would have ever expected to feature a competitive PvP scene. If you want more details on it, you can check out the Rimworld PvP channel, which goes in great detail about how this game mode functions, how to participate, while also showcasing different matches. The Gibbet Cage Fear mechanic. You probably know what the Gibbet Cage is and how it functions. If you don't, it's rather simple. It's a cage that can be built out of different materials and used to store in corpses for public display. Storing corpses in a gibbet cage will frighten nearby slaves, making them more subservient. However, that was not the case at first. Initially, Rimworld featured an additional mechanic called Fear. By displaying corpses of dead raiders in a gibbet cage, pawns passing next to a gibbet cage, would receive a mood debuff named Fear. Not only that, but players will also make use of gibbet cages to display dead raiders in order to scare off other raiders and convince them to simply not approach their colony. This mechanic was later on removed, as deemed to be very broken and possibly overpowered. And now we have reached level 6 of the Iceberg, the final level on this list, where light doesn't shine, where up and down are one and the same, and terrible beasts roam the abyss. The first entry on level 6 is "The game was made to sell Tynan's book." This is such a weird conspiracy theory that it couldn't belong anywhere else other than level 6. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. This conspiracy theory implies that Rimworld was developed for Tynan to publicize and sell his book, named Designing Games, A Guide to Engineering Experiences. I have to say, this sounds rather silly, but I do like the idea of this man just writing an entire book, finding little to no success with it, and deciding to create an incredibly successful game just to shill his book on the main menu of said game and increase its sales in order to become a bestseller author. It's absurd on a whole other level, and the mental gymnastics required for this to even be conceivable are so out of reality, making this entry deserve its rightful spot on level 6. I love this conspiracy theory, it's incredibly amusing to think about, and if it ever turns out to be an actual reality, it will be deranged on a whole other level. The next entry on level 6 is a rather dark one. If you're sensitive to subjects such as cyberpunk and PDF file formats, I would advise you to simply skip this one. The entry is Child Highmates. Highmates are a xenohuman in Rimworld bioengineered to serve as perfect lifelong companions. They have a subservient and submissive mindset, are incapable of violence, and are gifted with perfectly beautiful bodies. Now, Rimworld xenohumans have two different types of genes in terms of heritability: germline genes and xenogenes. Germline genes, also called endogenes, are genes heritable through birth, such as the ones of Itaki or Impids. Impid parents will give birth to an Impid, Itaki parents will give birth to an Itak, and if they are combined with another xenohuman or baseliner, they will give birth to a hybrid. Xenogenes, on the other hand, are genes that are not passed down through birth. If a xenohuman with xenogenes was to reproduce, their offsprings wouldn't bear any of their genes, resulting in either a baseliner or a xenohuman with endogenes, meaning that pawns with xenogenes cannot appear naturally, rather they must be created. This is the case for Hazars as an example, but far darker, it's also the case for Highmates. If Highmates can only be created intentionally, and they're also designated to be perfect partners, the presence of a child Highmate in a colony, in another faction, or in a slave ship suggests a very dark, disturbing conclusion, which is that someone at some point took a child and transformed it into a Highmate through the use of a Highmate xenogerms. I will let you draw your own conclusions as to why would that happen. Regardless, this is a very dark subject and topic, which is why I'm assigning level 6 to this entry. Rimworld Mobile is the next entry on this list. With the ever-increasing popularity of mobile gaming, it shouldn't come off as a surprise that many people will be interested in playing Rimworld on their mobile devices or on their tablets. Despite this, an official version for Rimworld on mobile was never developed, and yet, every now and then, videos featuring Rimworld gameplay on mobile devices will surface on the web. Perhaps porting Rimworld to a mobile device wouldn't be that hard in theory or in practice, but it's the mystery surrounding the existence of such a version that makes this entry interesting. And now, last but not least, the final entry of level 6. Pawns will never take their own life. It's rather interesting that in Rimworld, mental health is such an important mechanic. Having physically healthy pawns is completely useless if their mental status is on a constant degradation. They must be provided good conditions, good food, recreation, and other amenities. Otherwise, chances are a pawn's mood will cause them to enter a state of mental breakdown, where they will start a substance abuse spree, a food binge, or in the worst cases become violent or enter a murderous rampage. Despite this, and no matter how bad their mental state will be, no matter how many of their friends and family members will die right in front of their eyes, Rimworld pawns will never take their own life. Rather, the most similar outcome will be for them to simply become fed up with the colony and deciding to leave permanently to never return. What actually happens off screen though is a completely different and unknown matter. To me it's rather obvious why this kind of mental breakdown was never implemented. While we have cannibalism, war crimes, and organ harvesting, I feel that a mechanic such as pawns ending it all could be rather disturbing to some, especially if they were really attached to their pawn, which could devolve into a more serious real-life issue, especially for people who are already in not a great mental state. Just imagine what this could do to someone who will be extremely depressed to begin with, deciding to play a game of Rimworld purely for escapism, creating a pawn that will perhaps resemble themselves, only for that pawn at some point to commit the unthinkable. I feel like that could go wrong in many ways, and I'm actually glad this was never implemented in the game. Remember, if you're struggling with mental health, make sure to reach out to friends and family. Even if you don't think it, you are loved and you will be missed. Never give up and always stay strong. Things will get better. And with this, I finish presenting this Rimworld Iceberg. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a great deal of fun creating the Iceberg, diving into the rabbit hole of Rimworld conspiracies and cut content, and I hope you had just as much fun listening to me yapping about it. As usual, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to motivate me in creating further similar content. I will also like if you left a comment, let me know your thoughts on it, whether you would have added other things to this iceberg or if you learned something new from it. I would also like to thank this channel members for supporting me directly. If you would like to join them, you can do so through the join button below. It helps greatly in supporting this channel and my work, and it's something that I will always be highly thankful for. And with that, I will now conclude this video. I wish you a good night. Until next time.